how donors believe AI should be used by nonprofits is vastly different than how nonprofits think nonprofits should use AI. And so while nonprofits are saying, well, yes, we need to use this to raise more money, donors are saying, no, you need to use AI to improve trust. We want people to trust you more. So use AI to increase trust by using it for fraud detection and to increase privacy and security and transparency. And so the reality is that donors believe that it's appropriate for a nonprofit to use AI, but they should disclose that they are. And so it'd be simple as we use AI to enhance the donor experience and that level of transparency. So we really, really need to make sure that, number one, that we evaluate every use of AI by whether or not it protects and promotes trust. And if it does, it's worthy of conversation and exploration. But if you can't answer that honestly, does this AI promote and protect trust? Then you probably shouldn't use it.
This is Future Formed, where we explore how nonprofits are driving efficiency and innovation to make a greater impact. I'm your host, Erik Fisher, and this show is presented by Jotform Enterprise, the leading web form building platform for nonprofit organizations worldwide. With response data securely stored online, you can create beautiful, customized forms that meet your needs. Stick around till the end of the episode to find out how your nonprofit can access an exclusive discount with Jotform Enterprise. Now, let's dive in. Today, we're joined by Nathan Chappell, Senior Vice President of DonorSearchAI, one of the world's foremost experts on the intersection of artificial intelligence and generosity. Nathan is an entrepreneur, author, and thought leader in the nonprofit sector, known for his work in advancing AI-driven fundraising. With more than 2 decades of experience leading multi-billion-dollar fundraising campaigns and pioneering AI solutions for nonprofits, Nathan is on a mission to transform the future of fundraising through responsible and beneficial AI. As the co-author of The Generosity Crisis and the founder of Fundraising.ai, a global think tank focused on ethical AI in philanthropy, he is shaping how organizations leverage technology to engage donors with trust and transparency. Nathan, welcome to the show. We're excited to have you.
Well, thanks so much, Erik. I really appreciate that. And I think ChatGPT's probably gotten pretty good at my bio by now. So it's just getting better and better. I appreciate all of that.
That's great. I can't attest to that. There was human fingers in there, I'm sure, probably holding the hand of an AI like a meshed glove.
Right.
So
exactly.
But you've had an impressive career spanning fundraising, AI innovation, and nonprofit leadership. So what inspired your journey into the intersection of AI and philanthropy?
Yeah, it's been an interesting, wild thing. And I get this question a lot. Truthfully, I identify as a nonprofit practitioner that happens to be a technologist. And it's interesting. I never intended it to be that way. This happens to a lot of people. I was actually working in technology right out of undergrad and then grad school, sold a company, ended up in nonprofit on accident because I was naive enough and, young enough to not say no and not realize that was going to be, 20 years of my career. But I fell in love with the work in the nonprofit sector for so long. Not surprising, after 2 decades of leading fairly large-scale nonprofits, I found ways to get back to my love of innovation and that entrepreneurial kind of spirit. And that was back in 2017 when we started using machine learning and deep learning to predict which individuals were likely to make a gift. And then, fast forward from 2017 to today, the world has turned completely upside down, and the world of AI has shifted dramatically in the last 5 years. And it's super exciting to be kind of riding that wave. And while there's tremendous headwinds facing the nonprofit sector, I believe that this is truly an inflection point, and not in a trivial sense, in the most profound sense, where the nonprofit sector can either rise to the occasion and overcome some of the headwinds that are facing, charitable participation, or become a statistic. And I remain this hopeful pessimist that worries about the future, but tends to wake up every day with this rally cry and hopefully a boost of inspiration that we can do this.
Well, speaking of those headwinds, obviously AI is becoming more common in the nonprofit fundraising sector, but skepticism would be one of those. So those headwinds. So what are the biggest opportunities for AI to improve efficiency from prospect research to campaign strategy?
Yeah, well, I think it's first to really understand that AI is this now extremely general term that means everything and nothing, right? And so while most people know how to spell AI now, they're the underpinning of the tools in the toolbox are pretty diverse. And so in the same way that your toolbox at home, you've got a saw to cut a piece of wood, but if you're going to hammer, a nail in the wall, you're going to grab a hammer. And so, in the most simplistic terms, there's AI that takes lots of data and makes it more simple. So predictive AI takes lots of data and distills it down into actionable insights. And then the generative AI that most people identify AI with now, what I'll just call modern AI, is about using all the world's information, creating more. So one is about creating less and the other is about creating more. And what I think is fascinating, having worked in predictive AI for 5 years before generative really became accessible, is that we realized early on that it didn't matter how much you asked for, when you asked, or for what purpose and what way, if you weren't asking the right person to begin with. So like predictive AI, we got really good at identifying patterns of like what characteristics that you share that you have in common with other people that give versus those that don't. And less than half of Americans give to charity ever. So the world is not your oyster. If you think it is, then I just burst your bubble. The second part, though, there's a little disillusionment with that, right? Because you can have like these great predictions on who, but no way to really activate that at scale. And so here in walks, our good friend Gen AI, who happens to be really good at doing things at scale and, very efficiently in a very democratized way, like this fully accessible and affordable. So now truly back to that inflection point is that we have this two-sided coin of precision and, amplification at our fingertips, and it's pretty remarkable. And so if I think about, the things that were not possible in large part, most things were not possible are entirely possible. Like we have creative people that are writing code and we have code writers that are writing creative. Like it's just insane, right? I mean, the world is flipped upside down. So in this world of that we've scarcity mindset and this defeated sense of like, oh, the headwinds are so big and it's just so difficult. Like there are tools today that weren't even conceived of 6 months ago that will draw you closer to donors. And they're in the most simple, basic, free ways. AI will transform not only understanding who and following a path of their connectedness to an organization, but it will actually provide us the ability to scale. And so that's through, all channels, text, email, voice, video, and so on. So almost no area within fundraising will not be touched by AI already continually in the near future.
Well, and you're doing one of those ways. DonorSearchAI helps nonprofits identify the most likely donors as much as you're able to. Can you walk us through how your AI models work and what makes them different from that traditional donor prospecting?
Yeah, it was really, this started out when I was working at a nonprofit. And so all of my work is really informed by me sitting in that nonprofit seat, very skeptical of outsiders, skeptical of vendors who were saying that they knew my industry and knew my struggles. We spent a year and a half building our first algorithm back in 2017. And it was really this idea that we had too much data and too few fundraisers. And that's a pretty common kind of thing. So we work in a hospital, and in the hospital, we had 2 million patient visits a year. So 2 million people came into the hospital, knew us to some degree, but only 2% of those patients were ever making a gift. And so we pointed machine learning and deep learning at this idea of saying, look, if we had enough data, could we correlate the correlation, or could we quantify the correlation between the people who gave, the 2%, and then the correlation of the people, and quantify that to people 98% that didn't. And it turns out like this is the best use case ever for machine learning. Like machine learning is really, really good at understanding, finding that needle in a haystack. And so fast forward, I launched a company that was essentially purchased by DonorSearch in December 2020. It does that same exact thing every day. And it's similar to other kind of classic, scoring methodologies, except that we build custom machine learning models for every client. So we work with World Vision and Shriners, and both of them are large national, multinational organizations and lots of universities and hospitals. But even two organizations in the same city are going to have a different demographic and geographic and culture of how they address their donor population, which means their model, if it's generic, would just not perform very well. It would actually it would provide generic responses. So by building custom machine learning models, you're actually able to fine tune based on that organization's unique characteristics, a model that would have high efficacy. And so we started doing this. And the only other difference is that we, having come from the nonprofit sector, I was very concerned about organizations that were going to build something for me that I couldn't interrogate or see. I couldn't question, like, how is this decision being made? And in fact, we made a conscious decision probably about 2019. There should be no such thing as a black box in the nonprofit sector. The nonprofit sector operates in the currency of trust. I mean, literally, it's the lifeblood of how we operate. That how do you trust something that you can't interrogate or see? And so we build models, and these custom models, but we build them in a transparent way, which means that you can open up the hood and look at all the variables. Now, in the private sector, it's not very popular because you're like, well, that's my IP. Like, that's how I get rich, But at the end of the day, if we work in the nonprofit sector, our ethos and the essence of why we belong that orientation should be different. So we only build transparent AI, meaning that when we build a model, we can actually show physically and graphically show exactly how the model's making decisions. So it removes that idea of like, we don't know how this thing is working and we just have to trust you. And so that's the big difference. And then, we've got actually a bunch of generative tools that we add on that summarize lots of data and allow you to access data. So it's just been kind of a wild ride over the last couple of years.
Now, one of the other major challenges with fundraising is knowing the right time to reach out to donors.
Sure. Yeah.
How does AI improve donor segmentation and engagement strategies?
Yeah. So going back to that idea that it didn't matter how much or when or in what way you asked someone if it wasn't the right person. So solving for who first is really important. But then, essentially the same type of AI in that toolbox, the predictive AI gets really good at understanding things like velocity. And so by other types of activity, whether someone fills out a survey or in a hospital, it's easy because they had more patient visits, so they know you better, or say in a symphony, they've attended more, performances during the week versus the weekend and more regularly. AI is able to then track velocity. So it's called time series. And so it actually starts looking at this person's becoming more engaged over a shorter period of time, and therefore they're essentially raising their hand, like, let's activate these people, or they're becoming less engaged over a longer period of time. And AI will say, hey, flag this person, like you might want to intervene, or bless and release, depending if it's someone that you really care about or not. Starting with who first is super important. And then once you have the who, it's important that the AI is essentially turned on and operationalized so that it's continually monitoring that connection. Because, there's a group called the Farm Link Project that I'm on the board for. I started out as a donor and advisor. But the way I feel about Farm Link Project today is very different than how I felt about it 2 years ago. And it's different than how I'm going to feel about it in 6 months. And so my connection to a nonprofit is ever changing. And we can track that change by the different things that I do or I don't do, whether, again, it's like making a gift, which is simple, or attending an event, or filling out a survey, or whatever it might be. So all these data points and this kind of digital exhaust allows us to essentially understand how much a person's leaning in or away from an organization. And so this is just the future, right? The future of nonprofits have to understand there's really no such thing as a donor or a prospect. There's a group of people that have a varying degree of connection to you, and we can say how much they care about you, and that connection will change every single day. So we have to get away from the stereotype and binary thinking of donor, prospect, good or bad. Lots of people, and that those people's impression of you changes constantly. And so point AI, which is really good at this, to continually measure that connection and essentially test how well you're doing as far as bringing them in.
Well, pivoting slightly, obviously we're talking about nonprofits and the ways AI is helping them, but what about improving corporate sponsorships and major donor workflows? In other words, how can nonprofits use AI-driven insights to strengthen those relationships?
Yeah, corporate's hard, especially on the predictive side. So on the predictive side, it comes up a lot, corporate plan giving, things like that, because, essentially the quality of a prediction is based on the data that's available. And it was, until very recently, it was that you really couldn't build a model that had strong efficacy without 10,000 examples of essentially what we call true positives. So something that it's like, this corporation looks like this, and we have, say, 20 data points about this corporation, and they did this thing. And most organizations don't have 10,000 corporations that donate to them. So they might have a few dozen. And so it does a really poor job of really kind of quantifying that aspect of it. It's like, this is a good corporation for you. But through, some really good data analysis, you can start to hone in on corporate values and how they're aligned with you. And that's just by using, like, especially with generative AI, large data sets and essentially using natural language query to say, hey, our values look like this. Can you look at this data set of Crunchbase or whatever it might be and say, who are the corporations that are aligned with us? And so there are tools now that are available to help you do that. But predictive AI, in that same kind of very specific way of like, I want to know that that corporation's 80% likely to give us, to make align with us and give us a gift, is very difficult because there's just not enough examples of that. And corporations are also very fickle. They tend to, with the stock market or the political landscape, very, very fluidly. And what you're loyal last week is not where you might be loyal next week. So that part's a little bit harder to predict as well.
Fundraising.ai emphasizes the importance of responsible and beneficial AI in philanthropy. What ethical considerations should nonprofits keep in mind when integrating AI into their fundraising strategies?
It's a great question, and I would say all of them. So we're, going back to the idea that nonprofits operate in the currency of trust. We have to take a very different stance on what we believe is acceptable in the nonprofit sector differently from what AT&T thinks is acceptable in selling more cell phones, or Nike thinks is acceptable for selling more shoes. The stakes are very low for them. In our sector, frankly, we can use technology to essentially manipulate people to give. The technology exists today, but we will diminish trust at scale doing that. And so when we think about responsible and beneficial AI, this is where fundraising AI really started to come into focus, because responsible AI, everyone talks about. Microsoft, Amazon, Google, OpenAI, even Meta, which, kind of is a joke. But in the fact that when I do a poll, I ask, how many people use a Facebook product like Instagram, WhatsApp, and it's something like 90%. Almost everyone in the world use one of Facebook's apps and then, or Meta's apps. And then you ask how many people trust Mark Zuckerberg, and every hand goes down. So even with that, there is a kind of general belief that or understanding that they all use the word responsible. They're all using responsible, which is based on an ethical, private, and secure kind of premise. Well, in the nonprofit sector, that's not enough. There are things that are ethical, but not beneficial. The one really good example of that is social media. So the premise and opportunity to build social media is not unethical. The idea of bringing people together, essentially what the original premise was, bring people together through this tool that kind of connects people, is not unethical, but has it had unintended consequences on humanity? And are there things about it that have not been beneficial? And of course, like the average person scrolls 300 feet on their phone a day. We see increases in anxiety and depression, and decreases in happiness, and increases in teen suicide. So there are many things like that I believe the nonprofit sector, because we are essentially free from the same financial incentives that Meta and OpenAI and Google have to provide scale over safety. The stock market only rewards them if they scale. We don't have those same pressures. So I believe that our what some people think is kind of our deficit is actually our superpower. The nonprofit sector has a superpower without those same financial incentives to basically be willing to raise their hand and say, look, what's acceptable for you is not acceptable for us. And by the way, we're going to really identify with what is acceptable. And so that's where Fundraising AI created a framework for responsible AI a couple of years ago. Now that's been signed by several thousand people and organizations, which has been pretty remarkable.
What are some of the best practices nonprofits should follow to ensure AI-driven fundraising remains transparent and builds donors' trust?
Yeah, I think this is something that was kind of an epiphany even for me, where, started working in AI a couple of years ago, solving for problems, right? We didn't know, we had too much data, not enough fundraisers. So let's use AI to help, kind of narrow the focus. And, we made lots of assumptions over the last couple of years of like, well, of course, nonprofits need to use AI to raise more money. And that's been kind of the primary way nonprofits have been thinking about AI, just how do I generate more money, or how do I enhance the donor experience? Like kind of all for the same purpose. And one day of a year ago, a friend of mine, Sherry and Koshi, were in DC together, and we were walking down the street. I just remember it distinctly. We're walking down the street, and it's like both of us, like we're having this conversation, and we like look at each other. We're like, who's asked the donors? And we're like 5 years into this, like no one's asked the donors. And so we end up self-funding a study together. And it's interesting because we're actually competitors, but in our world, we don't think of it this way, right? We're really looking to amplify impact. And so we self-fund the study, interview 1,006 donors. And not surprisingly, is that how donors believe AI should be used by nonprofits is vastly different than how nonprofits think nonprofits should use AI. And so while nonprofits, when we were, studying them, they're saying, well, yes, we need to use this to raise more money. Donors are saying, no, you need to use AI to improve trust. And so the number one and two ways were around privacy, security, and then number three, transparency. And so donors are saying, look, we want people to trust you more. So use AI to increase trust by using it for fraud detection and to increase privacy and security and transparency. And so to answer your question directly, that report was an epiphany because we realized that the nonprofit sector has moved so far ahead, but not actually created guidelines for responsible beneficial AI use that they publicly share. And so there's different beliefs on this, but the reality is that donors believe that it's appropriate for a nonprofit to use AI, but they should disclose that they are. And so it'd be simple as we use AI, and I'm building a personal website right now that has an AI policy on it that says I've used AI to enhance the user's experience. And the same thing for a nonprofit. We use AI to enhance the donor experience and that level of transparency. So I'm much more worried about a nonprofit that's actually not asking that question versus one that's saying, hey, I'm going to pause and not use AI until I've decided, what are our values? And this is not rocket science. Like, what are our values? What are the tools that we want to use? And how do those tools align with our values? And then come up with a simple, literally just a couple paragraph or whatever statement that guides them that says, like, we believe in using AI to amplify impact, that it will align with X, Y, and Z values that are already our shared values, and that we will continue to monitor our use of AI over time to make sure that we don't go off the rails. And so, I was with a fairly large group, did a keynote the other day, and I asked, like, how many people are using AI? And it was something around 80%, which is actually, from 2 years ago, that was like 8%. Really encouraging. But the follow-up question, how many of you have an AI governance policy? And literally every hand went down except for one in the room. It was about a room of about 500 people. And so you can see there's a fairly large gap there that we need to, like, the race to get stuff done and do things differently is there, and there's an appetite for it. But we really, really need to make sure that, number one, that we evaluate every use of AI by whether or not it protects and promotes trust. And if it does, it's worthy of conversation and exploration. But if you can't answer that honestly, does this AI promote and protect trust? Then you probably shouldn't use it.
Can you talk about how AI can help nonprofits better track and communicate the effectiveness of their fundraising efforts?
Yeah, I mean, that's where I also get really excited. I get excited about all technology. So, I mean, I'm an early adopter. I no longer wait in the line at AT&T when the new phone is coming out. Like I used to do that. Now I just wait for it to be delivered at my house. But, at the end of the day, AI is it's not a destination, it's a journey. And it means that when you start using it, you're going to continue to use it. It also means that the worst AI you'll ever use is today. And that, if you continue on this journey, you'll continue to improve. So, going back to that idea that no person is essentially static. Like, there is no such thing as like the way I identify with this organization and the way I'm going to prevail, how I interact with an organization is ever going to stay the same. So AI is just really good. And even modern / generative AI is really good at understanding like movement and correlations of things, and really like identifying, me today differently than, in 2 weeks and 2 months and 2 quarters and 2 years. And so this is where I think where a lot of the people who are not early adopters are like, okay, I'll do the AI thing, and because I have to, because there's so much, like, there's either FOMO or we're actually afraid of getting fired if I don't do it, but they just want to check the box and kind of set it and forget it. That is not how AI works. It's considered it's different than any other technology that humans have ever created. So it's considered an exponential technology, and I don't think people really understand the gravity of that word. Exponentials are not to be trifled with. I mean, exponentials are how cancer cell grows from 1 to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32 very, very, very quickly. It's also how, if you've heard of the 42 fold test, where you fold a piece of paper in half and then fold that in half and fold it in half and fold it in half. And basically, pretty soon you get a size of a phone book that you fold in half. Well, it only takes 42 folds in of a piece of paper to have a stack of paper from the Earth to the moon. 42 folds. So exponentials are not to be trifled with, and this technology is considered exponential because it's not relying on humans to build itself. There's a limited number of 20-year-old kids in Silicon Valley wearing hoodies that can actually program stuff. They're a finite group, and in the future of AI does not depend on those individuals any longer. AI trains AI, which is so different than anything that we've ever used before, like electricity or, I mean, pretty much any technology that essentially still operates fundamentally the same way as it did when it was created.
AI is allowing nonprofits to tailor outreach at scale, but how can nonprofits use AI to balance automation with authentic, human-centered donor relationships?
Yeah. Well, you keep on getting harder and harder questions here. So, and there's no right answer to this, right? Because every organization is different and you have to do what's right by your organization. I would encourage people that are listening to think small, not boil the ocean. Start with first start with what are our values and making sure that you're going to, build AI or use AI that aligns with your values. But then second is to identify a single use case, not something that's just going to can be so hard and so big and boil the ocean with. Start with a single thing. Like, wouldn't it be great to have a way to at our disposal to connect with people via text, but in a different way? And there's, sure enough, there's like brand new apps like Typo that allows you to take a voice memo and it translates it into a video with a subscript, and it's amazing. And if I had a donor that had a granddaughter, I'd be like, hey, so and so, I just wanted to, wish you congratulations for the birth of Olivia, and I'm sure it's going to be amazing. And have it transcribed into a video. It costs nothing. Like, these things are available. And so I think while we tend to like make the idea of AI so complicated, it can start in the most basic, elementary ways. And then once you've mastered that one use case, you're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. And actually, people really loved it. Let's try something new, and try something new and kind of peel back the onion, from there. So, the other thing about automation, whatever we can do in our sector to create automations to essentially not gamify, but allow, offload the mundane things and the manual things so that, it was brought to our attention which person we should reach out to and when, so that can be an ongoing basis, and then have tools that let you do that in a very practical and intangible sense. Again, I get super giddy about this opportunity, this intersection where we're at, where we've got like the most overworked, underpaid, hardworking, passionate group of people on earth that, could have gone and, made widgets or sold shoes or whatever, that chose this profession, not as a job, but as a way of life and essentially a calling. And then you supercharge them with tools that really amplify their impact, their ability to, bring change to the organization. That's what's going to get people really excited. Because if I'm working in the sector and I'm depressed because I have a limited ability to actually deliver mission, like, what if I can now create 20, 30, 40% more impact with my same amount of effort? That feels really good. I mean, we know we deal with significant burnout in our sector and the revolving door. I truly believe, like, if we can feel like we're making a bigger contribution to impact, that is just going to continue to fuel that inherent sense that we have, those that have come to the sector and feel like it's more than a job.
Well, with donor behavior shifting and technology evolving exponentially, like you said, how can nonprofits future-proof their fundraising strategies using AI?
Well, I would say the number one way that they will not future-proof their fundraising is not by using AI. I mean, there will be winners and losers. And, this is just the general overall sentiment that's been, I started saying this in 2017. I think I probably stole it from Andrew Ng, who is from Coursera. It's, AI will not replace fundraisers, but fundraisers who use AI will replace those that don't. And AI will not replace nonprofit organizations, but nonprofit organizations that use AI will replace those that don't. The ROI of AI is not about raising more money. It's about doing work faster. It's about doing it better. And at the end, it's about being happier. So you have higher retention and higher employee satisfaction. So there's zero doubt in my mind in the world and how markets work, winners and losers will prevail. Those that are using AI will essentially outperform those that are not. Employees that are in organizations that are resistant to change and resistant to technology will leave to go to organizations that are more progressive and innovative because they're competitive and they want to be successful. And organizations that put their head in the sand will find it very, very difficult to compete because essentially we live in this attention economy. And the attention economy means that like we are all maxed out in our ability to pay attention. Organizations that use AI have a better chance of breaking through that noise and actually building that connection. And organizations that don't and continue doing things the same way that they were doing them 3 years ago, 5 years ago, and heaven forbid 10 or 15, which is what most of them are doing, or many of them. I don't know if it's most, but many organizations admit that they, I just was with an organization last year that hasn't updated its thank you letter for 17 years. I mean, some basic elements here, so winners and losers. And I think those that kind of lean in and it's not something magical. I just did a keynote on this the other day that the difference of winners and losers in the AI world for nonprofits is not those that spend more money faster on new tools. It's those that create a culture of curiosity and they ask and empower their team to ask what if. And that's something that we inherently do as humans. Like we're just have to tap into that curiosity because like I said before, what was not possible now is entirely possible. And so all bets are off on what you can actually do.
Well, with that in mind, what advice would you give to nonprofit leaders who are unsure where to start with AI?
Yeah, so I would start by creating and incentivizing a culture of curiosity. If you are not a technologist leader, but you empower a culture of curiosity, 1,000 flowers will bloom. And I happen to know a leader like this I'm thinking of right now. She is of a very large children's hospital. She is admittedly not a technologist, but she understands the value of experimentation and research and development, essentially, which our sector doesn't do very well. And so allowing and incentivizing might mean like, I'm going to pay for lunch for anyone that wants to come together. And this could be virtual too. Anyone wants to come together and think of and discuss ways in which we can improve the donor experience through AI, and let's just have conversations. And we've done this even internally on our team, and it's amazing to think about. I mean, we're an AI first company, and we still are learning from each other because someone's like just did something for their own to plan a vacation or a menu for their family, and it had some weird like correlated application to our business, and we're like, wow, what if we did that for this, and this would be amazing. And so I think it's easy to get overwhelmed with this, but if we break it down into the question of what if we reward questions more than answers, if we, create a culture of experimentation and I admittedly for 20 years told people my fundraisers, stop looking over there, just focus on your piece of paper. Like just, and I wanted people just to stay narrowly focused on everything that, for their job. The reality is the world's different. Like we should really be coloring outside the lines because we now have these tools that can actually do things that were not possible when we were in these single lanes.
In the Generosity Crisis, the book you co-authored, you discuss how nonprofits need to rethink donor engagement to combat declining generosity. How do you see AI helping nonprofits adapt to these challenges and strengthen donor relationships?
Yeah. In fact, writing the book, we were probably naive in thinking that it was a 2-year period, that there would be a chapter that somehow we didn't know the answer at the beginning, but we thought if we study this enough and we lean in enough and we investigate enough that we'd come up with a chapter that kind of solves the generosity crisis. I mean, the headwinds are significant and they're complicated. I mean, everything from political involvement to religious participation to, too many nonprofits and omni-channel things and all this stuff. And, fair warning to anyone who reads the book, like have a box of cookies next to you because it's a bit daunting for the first 100 pages. I promise after the first 100 pages, it actually gets more inspiring. But, the reality is that, our sector has been doing things the same way and expecting a different result for a long time. What we came to the conclusion with, while there was no like easy answer from like, there's a magic bullet and fix everything. It came back to a core principle that people value connection. And in a world that's extremely atomized, in this AI atomized world, people value connection even more. They value personalization more. I mean, we even value direct mail more now than we did, 10 or 15 years ago. And heaven forbid it be a personal note. I mean, that's a premium. Like that is just like the end all. I'm going to save it, right? And put it on my refrigerator or put it in a box or something. Back to where we were 100 years ago. So inherently, we know this, and it's really now identifying like how do we do this at scale. So for nonprofits, I mean, really this idea that we came up with is that fortunately and unfortunately, humans are amazing and we're creative and we're empathetic and we can do all these great things, but we're not scalable. Like we're a single person that has single influence, right? And so AI happens to be the only scalable solution to solving for the generosity crisis. And now there's a big if. The if is that we point it for good in ways that are aligned with our values and ways that protect and promote trust, and not use it in ways that, say, manipulate people to give. And so we are at that intersection right now that's not philosophical. I mean, question used to be philosophical is no longer philosophical. It's like we can manipulate people to give using AI, but should we? No, probably not. There's the easy answer for you. But at the end of the day, I really think it's about understanding that AI is truly the only scalable solution. And that's where I think there's both a responsibility and an opportunity today to do that. The data is very clear with the generosity crisis. It's not even my data. It's it's Giving USA, the Giving Generosity Commission, and all of the data about volunteerism and about civic engagement. It's been long standing. I mean, this is really significant numbers. We know for sure if we don't do anything, that we will live in a future that's far less generous, or definitely less charitable, if not less generous. And that means fewer and fewer people. Now, only 46.8% of Americans give to charity at all. And that number is down from 66% just 20 years ago. So the data is significantly skewed downward. And that's where I think anyone who hears this message now can't only just hear the message, but is essentially deputized to make a difference. And that difference might be just talking about generosity to your family, or to your neighbors, or to someone else, or to, buying a nonprofit person lunch and learning more, about what they do or how you can help. And so, we become part of this virtuous ecosystem, hopefully, that can reverse, these downward trends, which are pretty significant.
Nathan, where can people go to learn more about DonorSearchAI, Fundraising.ai, and your work, and the best place to buy your book?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. The book is the easy one: Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and where all good books are sold. And it's on audio and Audible as well. So if anyone can't, afford a copy of the book, definitely reach out to me, send me a DM in LinkedIn. I'll take care of you. But LinkedIn is the best place to get to me. And honestly, I love my LinkedIn community. It's a place where I post thoughts. Really never consider myself a futurist, but I tend to live there a little bit more, and to kind of project out, like, where is the puck going and where should we be focused? So LinkedIn is really great. Go to fundraising.ai. There are something like 110, 120 hours of free video content, highly curated, from some of the best people in the world. And it's 10,000 people from 140 countries are involved in that effort. And it's an all volunteer collaboration. It's amazing. And so anything that, you want to get involved, if you want to download stuff, I mean, it's all there for the taking. And then, of course, DonorSearch, DonorSearch.net/AI. And we have a lot of information about DonorSearch, but DonorSearch.net is the place to go for that.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, that brings us to the end of today's episode of Future Formed. Nathan, thank you again for sharing your insights and for the work you're doing to shape the future of AI in philanthropy. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, we've got a special offer just for nonprofits. You can apply to receive a 30% discount with Jotform Enterprise. Visit jotform.com/enterprise/nonprofit to get started and see how Jotform can support your mission. Thank you for tuning in today, and don't forget to subscribe, share, and stay connected for more stories of innovation and impact in the nonprofit world. Until next time, I'm Erik Fisher, and this has been Future Formed.